The Galactic Empire had catalogued thousands of species, each measured, ranked, and filed into neat predictive models that claimed to explain how civilizations behaved under pressure. Some were conquerors by instinct. Others collapsed at the first sign of loss. Most followed patterns so reliable that war planners could forecast outcomes centuries in advance. When humanity finally entered the galactic stage, the analysts barely looked up. They came from a quiet spiral arm, carrying no ancient fleets, no biological horrors, no psychic signatures that set alarms ringing. Their ships were functional, unremarkable, almost inelegant. Their technology was competent but not exceptional. Their biology registered as fragile, soft tissue, limited lifespan, no natural weapons worth noting. Within days, humanity was classified as harmless, placed into the lowest category reserved for species that adapted to stronger powers or disappeared entirely. The Empire welcomed them with polite indifference. Trade channels opened. Observers were assigned. No defenses were repositioned. No fleets were mobilized. Humans were seen as another footnote in a long history of minor civilizations orbiting the gravity of galactic power. That was when the message arrived. It was not broadcast with fanfare. There were no threats, no grand displays, no attempt to impress. A single human representative addressed the high conclave in a neutral tone, speaking slowly, as if choosing every word with care. The translation matrices flagged no aggression, no deception, no emotional spike that would indicate hostility. The message itself was brief. Humans requested distance. Not isolation, not alliance, not protection. Distance. They asked that Imperial forces avoid their systems, that expansion routes be adjusted, that observation remain passive. Then came the final line, delivered without emphasis, without anger, without fear. A warning so understated that many delegates missed its weight entirely. Stay far, far away. The chamber responded with restrained amusement. Some species laughed openly. Others exchanged gestures that signaled confusion rather than concern. Warnings, after all, usually came from those with something to back them up. Fleets. Superweapons. Ancient reputations earned through conquest. Humanity had none of these. A warning without leverage was interpreted as insecurity, maybe even desperation. Imperial strategists reviewed the transmission in detail. They found no hidden codes, no strategic feints. Just a request framed as advice. Their conclusion was unanimous. The humans were afraid. Afraid of inevitable contact. Afraid of being absorbed into the vast machinery of the Empire. The warning was logged, archived, and dismissed as a cultural artifact of a young species unfamiliar with galactic politics. Still, procedure demanded a response. The Empire did not acknowledge fear, but it did test it. A proposal was drafted for limited engagement. Not an invasion, not a war. A demonstration. A reminder of scale. A way to show the humans that proximity to the Empire was not a threat, but a reality. The operation was approved without dissent. No one considered that the warning had not been issued in panic. No one questioned why a species so unremarkable would choose caution over submission. No one asked what kind of civilization looked at the vastness of the galaxy, measured its dangers, and decided that distance was the only acceptable boundary. As the orders were transmitted and fleets adjusted course, the human message faded from attention. It was referenced occasionally, usually with humor, sometimes with mild annoyance. A curiosity. An overreaction. Certainly not prophecy. The Empire had seen fear before. It had never learned to recognize restraint. In later cycles, archivists would note the anomaly hidden in plain sight. The warning lacked urgency, lacked bargaining, lacked hope of negotiation. It assumed refusal. It assumed consequence. But at the time, confidence in imperial inevitability smothered curiosity. Empires did not pause for quiet species. They expanded, absorbed, corrected. And so the decision moved forward, propelled by certainty, while the smallest variable in the equation was ignored entirely. That oversight would soon become the most expensive assumption the galaxy ever made. Galactic science prided itself on objectivity. Biology was measured in data points, psychology reduced to patterns, history compressed into probabilities. When analysts examined humanity more closely after first contact, they did so through these same lenses, and that was where the miscalculation deepened. Humans were studied as individuals rather than as survivors. Their machines were dissected, their genomes mapped, their art categorized. What went unnoticed was the environment that had shaped them long before they ever reached the stars. Humanity did not evolve on a gentle world. Their planet punished mistakes relentlessly. Gravity was heavy enough to grind bone and muscle into constant strain. Climate shifted without warning, turning abundance into scarcity in a single season. Predators hunted them not as rivals but as food. Disease spread invisibly, killing millions before its cause was understood. Extinction was never theoretical for humans. It was a recurring possibility that shaped every generation. From this pressure came a species that did not expect safety. Humans grew up knowing that comfort was temporary and survival required effort. When they failed, they did not vanish as many species did. They adapted. They learned. They endured injuries that should have ended them and carried psychological scars without losing function. Pain was not a signal to stop, it was information. Loss was not a reason to surrender, it was a lesson paid for in blood. The Empire's model struggled with this. Most civilizations collapsed when faced with sustained adversity. Humans did the opposite. Prolonged stress did not weaken them, it refined them. Where others optimized for efficiency, humans optimized for persistence. They built redundancy into everything, their bodies, their societies, their machines. Failure was assumed, planned for, even expected. That expectation made them resilient in ways no algorithm could quantify. Psychological assessments revealed contradictions that baffled xenologists. Humans formed strong social bonds yet tolerated isolation. They showed empathy yet displayed frightening capacity for violence when boundaries were crossed. They avoided conflict when possible, sometimes to the point of appearing passive. But when conflict became unavoidable, they escalated with absolute commitment. There was no half measure once the decision was made. Humans did not fight to prove superiority. They fought to remove threats permanently. This mindset was not born from conquest but from defense. For most of their history, humans were prey, then competitors, then reluctant dominators of their own planet. Every advance came with unintended consequences, and they learned to live with the knowledge that progress could destroy as easily as it could save. That awareness bred caution, not weakness. When humans asked for distance, it was not because they feared others. It was because they understood themselves. The Empire failed to grasp this distinction. In galactic history, warnings were usually attempts to deter stronger powers through bluff or alliance. Humanity's warning did neither. It did not promise retaliation, nor did it seek protection. It simply stated a boundary. Boundaries, to humans, were sacred lines drawn after hard-earned experience. Crossing them carried meaning. Observers noted that human military doctrine emphasized defense, decentralization, and recovery. Their fleets were not built for spectacle but for endurance. Their command structures allowed rapid adaptation without central control. Even their cultural stories glorified not domination, but survival against overwhelming odds. Again and again, their myths celebrated those who stood their ground when retreat was easier, who held on when logic said they should not. To the Empire, this seemed inefficient, even primitive. Why endure when surrender was an option? Why rebuild instead of submitting to a larger power? The answer was simple, but it lay outside imperial thinking. Humans did not equate survival with obedience. To them, existence without autonomy was a delayed extinction. They would rather risk annihilation than accept a future they did not choose. By the time these insights were partially understood, they were already being filed as academic curiosities. Interesting traits, noted for future reference. No one connected them back to the warning. No one considered that a species forged in constant danger might be uniquely dangerous when cornered. Humanity's strength was not in what it possessed, but in what it refused to give up. That refusal, quiet and absolute, was the foundation of everything that would follow. The decision to intervene was framed as routine. Imperial records labeled it a corrective measure, the sword applied countless times before to minor civilizations that hesitated at the edge of expansion. A single human frontier system was selected, distant from their core worlds, lightly populated, strategically insignificant. The choice was deliberate. The Empire did not seek destruction, only compliance. A limited strike would demonstrate reach, establish authority, and dissolve resistance before it could form. The fleet arrived without announcement. Imperial doctrine favored speed and shock, overwhelming force delivered before diplomacy could complicate outcomes. Orbital defenses were neutralized in minutes. Human vessels in the region were outdated by Imperial standards and were disabled rather than destroyed. The operation unfolded exactly as projected, clean and efficient, a model example of controlled power. Then the surface bombardment began. Targets were chosen for maximum psychological impact rather than tactical necessity. Infrastructure hubs, communication relays, population centers that supported the colony's independence. The Empire broadcast the strike across monitored channels, ensuring the message would reach human leadership. This was not war, they insisted. It was instruction. Submit, and this would not happen again. From an Imperial perspective, the restraint was generous. Casualties were within acceptable margins. No biological agents were deployed. No planetary sterilization authorized. Compared to previous interventions, it was almost humane. Analysts expected panic, frantic negotiation, perhaps a rushed appeal for protection under Imperial law. None of that came. Human channels went dark across the sector. Not jammed, not destroyed. Silent. There were no emergency transmissions, no pleas for mercy, no threats of retaliation. The absence unsettled some observers, but it was dismissed as shock. Young species often froze when confronted with real power. The Empire waited for the inevitable response. Hours passed. Then days. Imperial commanders sent a formal communiqué outlining terms of integration. It was returned unopened. Surveillance detected evacuation efforts on nearby human systems, not chaotic, but methodical. Assets were being withdrawn. Data archives scrubbed. Civilian traffic rerouted away from Imperial space. This was not surrender behavior, yet it was not resistance either. It was preparation. Within a standard cycle, a single transmission appeared on every major galactic relay. It did not originate from the attack system, nor from a central authority. Its routing suggested decentralized coordination, a network acting without a singular command node. The message was brief, unencrypted, and unmistakably human. You were warned. No demands followed. No threats were attached. The transmission ended as abruptly as it began. For the first time since the operation commenced, Imperial confidence wavered. Strategic councils convened to reassess the situation. Some argued the message was symbolic, a final gesture of defiance before capitulation. Others noted the lack of emotional markers common to species in crisis. This was not grief. It was not rage. It was acknowledgement. Additional probes were dispatched toward human space. Several failed to report back. Long-range sensors detected unusual activity along multiple human trade routes, patterns that did not align with evacuation alone. Manufacturing output spiked on worlds previously considered non-militarized. Civilian vessels were refitted with modular components whose purposes were unclear. Nothing overtly hostile, nothing that justified escalation under Imperial law. Yet the data refused to settle into reassuring models. The Empire assured its allies that the situation remained under control. Publicly, the strike was declared a success. Privately, contingency plans were revised. There was growing concern that humanity had not reacted as expected because it was not reacting at all. It was moving. What the Empire failed to understand was that the attack had not been interpreted as a lesson. To humans, it was confirmation. It validated every calculation that had led to the warning. It proved that distance would never be respected voluntarily. The strike did not provoke outrage. It resolved uncertainty. By the time Imperial leadership recognized the shift, the opportunity for correction had passed. The line had been crossed, not dramatically, not with ceremony, but with consequences that could no longer be negotiated away. The Empire had tested humanity to measure its limits. What it discovered instead was that some limits are not boundaries meant to be pushed, but thresholds that, once crossed, change everything. The first signs of retaliation did not resemble war. No fleets surged across borders, no planets burned in open defiance. Instead, Imperial logistics began to fail in small, almost ignorable ways. Supply convoys arrived late, or not at all. Navigation beacons reported minor calibration errors that compounded over distance. Autonomous systems flagged inconsistencies in their own decision loops and shut themselves down as a precaution. Each incident was explainable in isolation. Together, they formed a pattern no one could yet define. Humanity had not answered the strike with fury. It had answered with intent. Imperial analysts searched for a command structure to target, and found none that fit familiar hierarchies. Human forces did not centralize power. They distributed it. Authority flowed horizontally rather than vertically, allowing units to operate independently while pursuing a shared objective. When one node was disrupted, others adjusted without waiting for orders. This made decapitation strategies useless. There was no head to cut off. Economic networks were the next to unravel. Trade hubs critical to Imperial stability experienced cascading failures after minor software updates corrupted transaction histories. Debt records vanished. Resource allocations duplicated or contradicted themselves. Entire systems ground to a halt while administrators attempted repairs. Investigations traced the disruptions back through layers of automated bureaucracy to vulnerabilities no one remembered installing. Human cyber units did not announce their presence. They simply removed certainty. Military encounters, when they occurred, were brief and deeply unsettling. Human vessels did not engage in traditional formations. They appeared where prediction models said they should not be, struck at ranges considered impractical, and withdrew before counterfire could lock on. Their weapons emphasized precision over spectacle. Command ships lost propulsion without explosions. Sensor arrays went blind without damage. Crews were left alive, stranded, and forced to confront the possibility that survival had been permitted intentionally. The psychological impact was immediate. Imperial doctrine relied on visible dominance to maintain order. Humanity denied it that visibility. Every engagement raised more questions than it answered. Why were certain targets spared while others were erased from operational maps? Why did retaliatory strikes always miss by margins too precise to be coincidence? Fear spread not from loss, but from uncertainty. As resistance mounted, the Empire escalated. Larger fleets were mobilized. Emergency powers were invoked. Yet each escalation accelerated the collapse. Human tactics adapted faster than projections could be updated. What worked once never worked twice. Countermeasures were anticipated and neutralized before deployment. It became clear that humanity was not reacting to Imperial moves. It was anticipating them. Then came the message. It did not interrupt broadcasts or hijack channels. It was delivered through official diplomatic relays, following every protocol the Empire respected. A human voice, calm and unstrained, addressed Imperial leadership directly. There was no triumph in it, no anger. Only clarity. Humanity had not sought this conflict. It had structured its society to avoid it. But once survival was threatened, avoidance ceased to be an option. The objective was no longer deterrence. It was termination of the threat. The Empire began to understand too late that humans did not wage war to win battles. They waged it to end cycles. Their operations targeted the foundations of Imperial power: trust in systems, confidence in leadership, belief in inevitability. When those collapsed, fleets became irrelevant. Entire sectors withdrew from Imperial authority without a single human ship appearing in their space. Governors defected preemptively, calculating that resistance was no longer rational. Alliances fractured under the weight of doubt. The Empire was still vast, still armed, still dangerous, but it was no longer coherent. Humanity did not occupy conquered territory. It did not replace flags or install rulers. When systems fell out of imperial control, humans withdrew their influence as well. The absence was deliberate. This was not conquest. It was removal. By the time the Empire attempted to negotiate, its position had eroded beyond recovery. Humanity had demonstrated what the warning meant. Not a threat of violence, but a statement of capability. When pushed past restraint, humans did not rage. They dismantled. And once dismantling began, it continued until there was nothing left that could justify starting again. The war ended without a final battle. There was no decisive clash to commemorate, no singular moment when the Empire fell in fire and spectacle. It simply stopped functioning. Orders went unanswered. Fleets remained idle, awaiting commands that never came. Systems once bound by imperial authority operated independently, not in rebellion, but in absence. The structure that had governed the galaxy for millennia unraveled quietly, undone from within. When formal surrender was finally transmitted, it was received by multiple human nodes simultaneously. No ceremony followed. No demands for territory, tribute, or political control were issued. Humanity acknowledged the surrender, confirmed the cessation of hostile actions, and began withdrawing its influence immediately. To the confusion of every surviving imperial official, humans did exactly what they had said they wanted from the beginning. They stepped back. Reconstruction across former imperial space began without human oversight. Worlds long constrained by centralized control adapted rapidly once the pressure was gone. Trade reformed along regional lines. Defense pacts replaced empire-wide enforcement. In many systems, the most disruptive factor was not the war itself, but the realization that the threat of punishment was no longer real. Humanity had not replaced the Empire. It had removed it from relevance. Galactic councils scrambled to update their classifications. Humanity could no longer be described in conventional terms. It was not an aggressor species, yet no civilization had caused more systemic collapse in such a short span. It did not seek dominance, yet its capabilities demanded universal caution. Eventually, a new designation was approved, one without precedent. Humanity was labeled an existential deterrent. Not because it ruled, but because it did not have to. Diplomatic contact resumed cautiously. Human representatives remained polite, distant, and precise. They offered trade, knowledge exchange, and limited cooperation. They refused military alliances. They declined shared command structures. When asked why, the answer was consistent. Entanglement created obligation. Obligation invited interference. Interference led to outcomes humanity had already proven it would not tolerate. The frontier systems destroyed in the opening strike were rebuilt by humans alone. No reparations were requested. Memorials were raised, not as calls for vengeance, but as reminders. Loss was acknowledged without being weaponized. Within human space, the war was not celebrated. It was studied. Failures were documented. Successes were stripped of myth. The objective had never been pride. It had been survival. Among other species, the lesson spread faster than any official decree. Humanity was not feared because it was cruel. It was feared because it was controlled. Because it escalated only after calculation, not emotion. Because once it committed, it did not stop halfway. Civilizations adjusted their expansion routes accordingly. Borders shifted. Navigation charts were redrawn with wide, deliberate margins around human territory. Over time, stories replaced reports. Younger species spoke of humans in tones usually reserved for natural disasters or cosmic constants. Not malevolent, not benevolent, simply there. Something to respect, something not to provoke. Older civilizations, those that had once laughed at the warning, recorded a quieter conclusion in their archives. Power was not measured by how much space one occupied, but by how much force one could apply without needing to prove it. The galaxy learned that humanity's greatest strength was restraint, and its greatest danger was the loss of it. The warning that had once been dismissed was now taught as a foundational example in diplomatic academies. Not because it was eloquent or threatening, but because it was honest. Humans never wanted the galaxy. They never sought to rule it, reshape it, or stand above it. They wanted room to exist on their own terms, free from intrusion. When that wish was ignored, they demonstrated the cost of misunderstanding it. And when it was finally respected, they returned to silence, leaving behind a galaxy that would never again confuse quiet boundaries with weakness.